Hello, Mr. Gidu. You at It's Tuesday, August 29th. This is Africa 54.
Ethiopia's government recently declared a state of emergency over violence in the Amhara region. We'll speak to the Amhara People's Front Public Relations Office on whether the escalation could have been prevented. Observers raise concerns about Zimbabwe's last week presidential elections as President Mnangagwa's main challenger, Nelson Chamisa, counts on the international community to apply pressure over the way the vote was conducted. And in our health report, research from the Lancet Commission on Diagnostics shows that only 1 in 2 people have access to basic testing services, and access to diagnostic testing is a major challenge in low and middle income countries. All this and much more coming up on today's Africa 54.
We begin our broadcast in the Horn of Africa, where fighting between Ethiopia's military and militiamen in the Amhara region has killed at least 183 people, according to the UN Human Rights Office. The local militia called Fano is an ethno-nationalist Amhara youth militia, and they are refusing to comply with the government order to disarm and demobilize regional special forces. VOA has made several attempts to reach an Ethiopian government official for a reaction to these allegations of killings in the Amhara region, but we were told to follow the regular updates of the State of Emergency Command Center. In an interview with VOA's Paul Ndiho, Omar Mohammed, the Amhara People's Front Public Relations Officer, discusses whether this escalation could have been prevented.
Today, they are hunting down Amhara youth in Addis Ababa and rounding them up and taking them to different locations. And they are jailing them under horrible conditions. And the reason they give is there are security threats to the city. That's the reason they give it. They even locked up recently a parliament member who is a parliamentarian who is an Amhara. They beat him up, but a parliament member whose immunity has not been lifted yet. They just went to his residence and grabbed him, beat him up, and put him in jail.
Do you have evidence to support that?
Of course we do have evidence. Of course we do.
Can you provide me with that evidence?
Definitely.
Would the outcome have been different if, let's say, Abiy Ahmed's government extended an olive branch to the people in Amhara region? Say, you guys, you helped me out to fight the war in Tigray. You people are on my side. Let's work together, build Ethiopia.
Of course. But he's not the kind of person who would do that. We know that for sure.
There are people who think that maybe Abiy Ahmed is doing the right thing. Obviously, you disagree, and I respect your opinion. But if you were to be in his shoes, what would you do differently?
When he came to power, the ones who supported him the most were the Amharas. Everybody was happy. I was happy. We thought he's an Oromo. But the Amhara people supported him regardless because they thought he was going to be a good leader. But that turned out sour, like 5-6 months into his power.
How would you deal with the different forces who are so powerful that can do whatever they want to do at any time?
In Ethiopia, we have a constitution that encourages ethnic politics. That divided the land into killers, which are based on ethnicity, actually. And if I was the leader, I would change the constitution. And that constitution doesn't even comply, doesn't even meet international requirements. That of UN, for example, and they know it. Everybody knows it. This is the only country that is that has ethnic-based constitution in the world, unless the root cause is addressed. The constitution, which is the foundation of the ethnic politics in Ethiopia, there's not going to be any solution. So what we are trying to do is to get rid of the constitution and then try to have a constitution that is very inclusive and that addresses the issues that are at hand.
We reiterate that the Voice of America has made several attempts to reach the Ethiopian government official for official reaction to these allegations of killings in the Amhara region, but we were told to follow the regular updates of the State of Emergency Command Center. Zimbabwe's main opposition party, the Citizens Coalition for Change, on Tuesday called for a new election because it is disputing the result of last week's vote, calling it a fraud. The CCC deputy spokesperson Gift Siziba told a news conference that the party was calling on the African Union and the Southern African Regional Bloc SADC to facilitate a return to legitimacy in Zimbabwe.
The entire process was shambolic and illegal. We have emerged out of this crisis as a people because of the failure of the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission to hold a free, fair, and credible election. All the stakeholders that have observed this election have condemned the Zimbabwean election, the pre-electoral environment, the election itself, and the post-electoral environment that we are in today. This election failed by all standards the requirements of the law of our country, which is the Electoral Act and the Zimbabwean Constitution.
VOA Zimbabwe asked George Charamba, President Emerson Mnangagwa's spokesperson, if the president is willing to engage with the opposition leader Nelson Chamisa over Chamisa's election concerns. Seems like we don't.
The aggrieved party in this particular case is Chamisa. He's the one who must seek audience with the president of Zimbabwe. But do so on the understanding that there is a president-elect who has won an election. Do so on the understanding that that president is proceeding to be sworn in and to constitute the government, which therefore means that thereafter, Chamisa will be coming to a head of state as a subject. Right? And will do so within a framework made available by government, not on the basis of his own rules and caprices. It will not work that way, right? And do so on the basis of realizing that Zimbabwe comes first, not his own political ambitions, which in any case has not been validated by the Zimbabwean people. So really, the bowling is in his court. He must simply dismantle his ego, which appears to be soaring complexly so, and realize there is a winner who has become president, a president who is leading a government, and therefore a president who is, in fact, presiding over the affairs of the Zimbabwean state. Once we assume that temperament, I can assure you it will be very easy for the two to meet.
That was George Charamba, spokesperson for Zimbabwean President Emerson Mnangagwa. For more on Zimbabwe's just concluded general elections, I'm joined live via Skype from Harare, Zimbabwe by Promise Mkwananzi, spokesperson for Zimbabwe's opposition party, Citizens Coalition for Change. Mr. Mkwananzi, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you.
Now, your party has disputed the outcome of this last week's election. You're calling for fresh elections. How realistic is this, given that the Electoral Commission of Zimbabwe has already declared President Emerson Mnangagwa the duly elected leader of Zimbabwe?
Well, it's very realistic, especially in light of the fact that there is now no dispute as to the fact that the elections fell extremely short of expected democratic standards of a free and fair election. And it was roundly condemned domestically, regionally, and internationally. So this election has got an indelible state. It cannot work. And the results that were announced by ZEC are pure false. So there is no election in Zimbabwe. And not just as far as the CCC is concerned, but also as far as the election observer missions that attended to the election are also concerned. So I think that there is sufficient consensus to build
Losing you, Mkwananzi, are you still there? Okay.
I'm there.
All right. So let's move on. So what options do you have if, you're unsuccessful with this quest to have fresh elections through Zimbabwe's judicial system?
Well, we don't anticipate to be unsuccessful. We think that we are already partially successful in convincing all the stakeholders that the election that was conducted in Zimbabwe does not reflect the true will of the people of Zimbabwe, does not meet expected standards of any decent election. And therefore, as far as we are concerned, we believe that there was no election before, and we are calling for a fresh election that is held under, fair conditions, so that the outcome of that election reflects the will and express the wishes of the people of Zimbabwe.
And very quickly, Mkwananza, would you consider holding any talks with President Mnangagwa in the interest of the Zimbabwean people?
We have always been open to talk, but we're not going to be talking about elections. We're not going to be talking about an inclusive government and all those kind of things. We are going to be talking about a transitional framework which will allow for the conduction of a free and fair election in the quickest possible time frame.
Mr. Mkwananzi, thank you very much for your insight into what exactly the opposition needs to do moving forward. Promise Mkwananzi is the spokesperson for Zimbabwe's opposition party Citizens Coalition for Change. We would like to mention here that Voice of America, Africa 54, is making efforts to speak directly to Zimbabwean President, His Excellency Emmerson Mnangagwa. Moving on to Sudan, Sudan's army chief traveled Tuesday to Egypt on his first trip abroad since the outbreak of war in April. General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan is to hold talks with Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, a key ally on the latest developments in Sudan. Burhan, who traded his trademark military fatigues and green beret for a suit and tie, was greeted by Sisi in Egypt's northern coastal city of El Alamein after flying from Port Sudan. As al-Burhan departed, medics and witnesses said 39 civilians were killed, most of them women and children, in the shelling of Nyala in South Darfur state, where fighting between the army and paramilitary forces has intensified. Now to Niger, where French President Emmanuel Macron says its ambassador to Niger will remain in the country despite pressure from leaders over a recent coup.
Our policy is simple. We do not recognize coup leaders. We support the president, who has not resigned, and we are committed to standing by his side. We support ECOWAS' diplomatic effort and the military action when it will be approved, in the framework of the partnership.
Macron also reiterated its support to Niger's ousted President Mohamed Bazoum, whose decision not to resign Macron called courageous. A husband and wife who were farmers in their native Nigeria are turning the skills they learned there into a thriving small business in the U.S. state of Maryland. VOA's Thierry Kaore reports from Brookville, Maryland, in this story narrated by Salem Solomon.
Before moving to the U.S. with his wife in 2016, Olanenyi Balagun was a farmer who had tilled over 100 hectares in southwestern Nigeria. Now living in Brookville, Maryland, not far from Washington, he says he has found his passion again with his farm, Dodo Farm.
I feel really gratified and satisfied because it's not like I'm starting a new venture. It's just like, to me, like I continue what I've been doing, what I've known to be doing all my life. Because I was farming in Nigeria before, and all my dream was, okay, if I'm here, I want to continue what I'm doing in Nigeria because I love farming. I love being in the midst of grains, trees, planting.
His wife, Tomitob Fajang Gwebzi, an accountant by training, a professor and agribusiness consultant at the University of Maryland, supports him in this project.
So my father was a farmer as well as an engineer. So when I met my husband and he said the only thing he wanted to do, the only condition for moving to America with me was to farm, I felt like, okay, well, this is a chance to realize some of the dreams that my father didn't realize.
Balagun started with a small area for his farm, but has been able to expand over time. He also says he has obtained his organic certification to avoid using synthetic fertilizers and pesticides for his vegetables.
Here we have summer produce right now, because in the heat there are certain produce that doesn't really do well. So like right now we have okra, we have jute leaf, we have Malabar spinach.
Balagun's produce sells very well at the local farmers market in the region, like here in Washington, says Jane, who didn't give us her last name.
I got some spinach. I feel very good about it. They have unusual varieties and they're always very fresh and delicious.
Many immigrants feel like they need to learn new skills to succeed in the United States, but Balagun believes the skills they bring with them might be enough.
I think the best thing is whatever you think you know best, then that is what you should continue to do.
With government support through Montgomery County's farmer assistance programs, Balagun says he was granted funds that helped him purchase farm equipment and increase his production.
You know, since when COVID started, we have been really encouraged to produce more. They give us money to produce more for the community, for the less privileged, food banks. We have some equipment there already. It's through the county.
Balagun keeps adding new crop varieties to serve the community. He says this is a way of giving back to America, a land he believes has given so much to him. For Terry Cowray in Brookville, Maryland, Salam Solomon, VOA News.
Still to come, will trial dates hinder the campaigning of U.S. presidential candidate Donald Trump? We'll be back.
This week on Straight Talk Africa, what is the fate of the Wagner Group now that the death of its leader Yevgeny Prigozhin appears to have been confirmed? The private military contractor has a strong presence in a number of African countries. Will this continue? For in-depth analysis, join me, Heidi Adams, and my guests on the next Straight Talk Africa.
In other news, a 20-year-old man has become the first Ugandan to be charged with aggravated homosexuality, an offense punishable by death under the country's recently enacted anti-gay law, according to prosecutors and his lawyer. Specifically, the 20-year-old is charged with performing an unlawful sex act with a 41-year-old man. Ethiopia opposition politician Bekele Gerba is requesting political asylum from the United States, citing concerns for his life and the safety of his family. An opponent of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, Bekele says that he has resigned from his position as vice president of the Oromo Federalist Congress. In South Sudan, the world's number 62 ranked basketball team hit 15 three-point shots on their way to a stunning 89-69 victory over 27th ranked China in the Basketball World Cup. It was their first ever win at the World Cup. A March trial date has been set for former U.S. President Donald Trump on charges of plotting to overturn the 2020 presidential election. VOA senior diplomatic correspondent Cindy Sain has more.
Lawyers for former President Donald Trump were back in Washington Monday for a hearing that set a March 4, 2024 date for his trial in conjunction with his alleged effort to stop the peaceful transfer of power at the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2020. Trump's lawyers had no comment for VOA, but expressed their disappointment to the judge. They had asked to put off the trial until April 2026. After the November 2024 presidential elections. The prosecution wanted the proceeding to start January 2nd with jury selection in December. One expert told VOA he believes U.S. District Judge Tanya Chutkan is a strong judge who made a wise decision.
She made some very good points that the public really needs to know. They need to know one way or the other before this election, whether Trump is guilty of these very serious charges.
A grand jury of citizens in Washington voted to indict Trump on 4 felony counts in the case, including conspiracy to defraud the United States and conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding. He has pleaded not guilty to the charges and has repeatedly claimed, without evidence, that the charges are politically motivated.
How can my corrupt political opponent, crooked Joe Biden, put me on trial during an election campaign that I'm winning by a lot, but forcing me nevertheless to spend time and money away from the campaign trail in order to fight bogus, made-up accusations and charges?
Trump has said the indictments are only boosting his support among voters. But one of his Republican opponents, former Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson, disagrees, saying there is no way Trump can win a general election.
Republican voters have to understand we can't win with Donald Trump, and that's why I addressed it very directly.
Many of the January 6 events happened out in the open for everyone to see. Presidential historian Alan Lichtman says, leaving Trump vulnerable to a possible conviction ahead of the November 2024 presidential elections.
What if Trump is sitting in jail, which is not impossible either? Technically, he could still run, but would the Republicans really want at the top of their ticket a guy who's been convicted of subverting our democracy?
Trump is the first former American president to face criminal charges. If convicted, he could spend the rest of his life behind bars. He is also facing charges in New York, Georgia, and Florida. Cindy Sain, VOA News.
It's time for a health report, and joining us is Africa 54 health correspondent Lindo Mudu with the latest on the annual Air Quality Life Index. Hello, Lindo.
Hello, Esther. Hello, everyone. Research from the Energy Policy Institute at the University of Chicago says air pollution is more dangerous to the health of the average person on planet Earth than smoking or alcohol. The annual Air Quality Life Index report shows that fine particulate air pollution, which comes from vehicle and industrial emissions, wildfires, and more, remains the greatest external threat to public health. According to the data, permanently reducing these pollutants to meet the World Health Organization's guideline limit will add 2.3 years to people's life expectancy. Asia and Africa have some of the weakest infrastructure to deliver citizens timely, accurate data. They also only receive tiny slices of global philanthropic funding. Research from the Lancet Commission on Diagnostics shows that only 1 in 2 people have access to basic testing services and access to diagnostics testing. This is a major challenge in low and middle income countries. This year, stakeholders in global health passed a resolution strengthening diagnostics capacity. Observers say it is a significant step towards improving access to quality and accurate diagnostic tests. However, they say many more needs to be done to ensure better access to quality diagnostic tools and expertise in developing countries. For more insight, I spoke with Neha Agarwal, Global Program Co-Lead for Diagnostics at PATH, an international nonprofit health organization.
Unfortunately, the latest reports indicate that over half the world's population actually don't have access to quality diagnostics. And if we look at that number specifically in low and middle income countries, it actually only drops to 20%. What does that mean? That means 4 out of 5 individuals who go seek care don't have access to appropriate diagnostics. If you think about it from a health guiding principle perspective, if you don't have the correct diagnosis, you likely don't know what is ailing you, which means that clinical care pathways will not necessarily be appropriate given your condition. The other side of it is looking at it from the patient perspective, which is when they come to seek care and we're unable to provide them with the appropriate tools and the appropriate information to guide their clinical care, it is going to be very difficult to establish trust with that individual, and it will be very difficult for that individual to have confidence in the health system, which means that there will likely be a loss to follow-up. There will likely be a lack of an incentive to come back the next time they are feeling ill or sick, or their child is ill or sick. And so the whole system becomes a downward spiral. So diagnostics are really an underappreciated tool to build trust and confidence in the health system.
You have attended the World Health Assembly, where there have been discussions about a resolution to strengthen diagnostic services and capacity. What are your thoughts on the resolution and some key aspects?
The diagnostic community is very excited that we now have a piece of policy and a resolution that for the first time really carves out the role that diagnostics play in reaching universal health coverage. And that role will help really mobilize the coordination and the catalyzing of funding to support the diagnostic resolution and its implementation.
To what extent does improving access to diagnostics help move the needle when it comes to UHC, universal health care coverage, as a whole?
For me and for many of the colleagues in my diagnostic community, we see the direct linkage. Without having appropriate access to diagnostics, we will not be able to appropriately guide a patient's clinical pathway. And without diagnosing in the very beginning stages of that cascade, we will not know what the disease burden of patients and communities are around the world. We will not know who is accessing care. We will not know what their appropriate follow-up should look like. And so we see diagnostics as really the door, the first step in involving and having patients participate in the health system and really opening the door to universal health coverage. You know, diagnostics is really that first touch point that a healthcare system has with a patient. And again, if we're able to demonstrate that at a government and even a private level, when a patient comes to seek care, we have the tools and the resources to appropriately guide their clinical pathway, we will undoubtedly see an uptake in accessing facilities and accessing care. So that alone will help increase the demand for seeking health services and proactively participating in the health system.
Thanks, Lino, for that health update. And thank you, viewers, for joining us today. We'll see you right back here tomorrow. Have a good evening.